you for joining us for today's webinar, Tips to Improve Email Response Rates, or Email Marketing 101. My name is Craig Stouffer with Pinpointe, and I'm joined today by Forrest Cassidy, CEO of Lead Ferret and co-sponsor of today's event. We have some special, we do have a special offer for the attendees today. I'll go through this real quick. For Pinpointe, we have 1 month of free service. If you like, you can go ahead and sign up at that link there, pinpointe.com/get-started. Use the noted coupon code. That'll be good for about 2 weeks, and that will give you a month of free service. You can sign up for any level of service. For those of you maybe not familiar with Pinpointe, Pinpointe is a business class email marketing system or email marketing solution. There are over 6,000 companies using the Pinpointe platform. Most are mid-sized businesses. We service both B2B as well as B2C, or business-to-business as well as business-to-consumer type customers. You can get better email response with Pinpointe. Our customers have responded and said that Pinpointe is kind of like Constant Contact on steroids. Forrest, if you want to take a second and tell us about Lead Ferret.
Great. So Lead Ferret is the world's first 100% free B2B data site. Basically, it's an online directory on steroids, to use Craig's analogy. Essentially, companies, contacts within those companies, very detailed contact information, including email addresses, and now for many of the records, we even have things like links to their social media profiles. Over 5 million records currently, with a goal to have 20 million records in the system by the end of 2012. A really robust set of search tools allows you to filter by things as specific as a company name or a person's name, and things as broad as an entire state or industry.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so with that, let's dive into today's presentation. So what we're going to focus on is a brief overview of deliverability. What is sort of the state of the market, so to speak, with deliverability? And we're going to dive in and talk a little bit more about spam content filters, dealing with images, writing tips, coding tips. So we should have quite a bit of information here to help you today. Let's talk about what today's session is and is not. Today's session is tactics to help improve your readability and the response rate and deliverability of your HTML-based emails, or kind of why did my good email go bad. Today's topic is not how can I trick a spam filter. So that's not the focus. We want everybody to remain CAN spam compliant and so forth. We want you to understand what kind of things, A, will cause your system, your email to get potentially filtered, and we're going to touch on that just on a high level. And then more so today's event, we're going to focus a lot more on you know, the actual content. Okay? So first of all, how big is the deliverability problem? We get a lot of questions we've noticed from customers more so in the last 6 months or so. So let me give you an update. This is kind of interesting. I'm on slide 9. And based on a report from Return Path, this is a very recent report, what we've seen is between the first half of 2011 and the second half of 2011, so very recent data as of the very end of last year, we've seen that now only 76% of business emails are getting into the inbox. So about 8%, 8.5% are just completely dropped. They go into ether space, disappear. 15.5% are being marked and going straight into the spam filter, spam folder rather. So this is a pretty big difference. I mean, that's versus 81% just in the middle of 2001. So we've seen, and we've actually seen a further drop off even since the first part of 2012. So interesting point. Deliverability has really changed. Gmail, we've noticed, has dropped off substantially since since around December 2011. And specifically, to give you an idea, one of the situations that's changed with Google in the last 12 months is, you know, Google now has a feature, if you will, that they classify message as important. And customers can enable or disable this feature. Right now, as of present, about 93% of Gmail inboxes, and by the way, that's not just, you know, an email address at Gmail. That includes enterprise customers that are using the app platform. You know, so you might actually have a business email address, but it's actually hosted by Google. Okay, so 93% of Google inboxes have this feature enabled. It's based on what's called subscriber engagement, which is, do you read the emails? Do you delete them automatically? What sort of filters do you set up? But basically, how do you engage, or how do the collective recipients of your emails engage with you as a company and engage with your emails? So this is really an important impact. The impact is that the inbox rates have dropped to 79%. So within Google, 21% are just either disappearing or are being marked as spam. And we've seen an increase, or rather a decrease in that deliverability even since this data from early 2000. And then of the 79% that are getting to the inbox, what we're finding is only 8% of those emails are marked as priority. Okay, that's a 54% decline in deliverability, basically, or priority markings since the first half of 2011. Huge difference, okay? So, again, if you think you're having some deliverability issues into Google, not that it necessarily makes it any better, but you're not alone. This seems to be a consistent change. And as we go through today, you'll see one of the things that's very important is subscriber engagement. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Another aspect that you'll see that's important for your deliverability as an email service provider is the complaint rate. You know, whether people complain, how they complain, and so forth. But the number of complaints will impact your deliverability. So what we've seen is, you can see here from July to November, in about a 5-month period through the second half of last year in this report, the average complaint rates, I believe this is data is actually from AOL, but the average complaint rates doubled. So that's substantial. And again, complaint rates are going to impact your deliverability. A complaint rate, to be specific, is one of two things. This graph is about companies who, recipients who click the button that says this is spam, right? They don't bother to go look for an unsubscribe link, or they don't trust it, but they just click this is spam rather than going any further. That's a complaint. A much more serious complaint is when a recipient actually forwards your email to abuse, like abuse at AOL, for example, or abuse at Constant Contact, etc. So those abuse complaints are much, much worse, much more offensive. These numbers that we have here are just when somebody clicks the button that says this is spam. Your goal as an email sender, to give you a number at point, would be to have no more than 1 complaint per 2,000 emails sent. Now, sometimes that's aggressive, sometimes that's pretty basic, but we'll find that if the majority of your email recipients are AOL, for example, and Yahoo, we find that AOL recipients tend to click the spam button much more than anybody else. We find that Yahoo recipients will tend to click the spam button not quite as frequently, but they're sort of second in the list, is what we see. Okay, but you'll see that if you have spam complaint rates above that, so if you're sending to AOL and you're getting more than about 1 complaint per 1 to 2,000 emails, it varies from service provider to service provider. But if you're getting more frequent complaints than that from your emails, then it's going to directly impact your deliverability. And candidly, if you're getting more than that and you're using an email service provider, it's probably going to impact your service provider. They're not going to be too happy with you. So always watch those numbers. In Pinpointe's case, we actually provide that feedback. So if you send a campaign, you'll know exactly how many spam complaints you've got. If you send 10,000 emails, we'll tell you if you had 4, 5, 6 complaints. Okay, so let's talk about 2 things that affect email response rates. Okay, so the first part of the filter is get to the inbox, and I call that Email Marketing 201. We have a whole separate webinar that drills down just on these issues, and a whole aspect of how a spam filter works. Getting across the spam filter. Again, not how to trick a spam filter, but understanding how a spam filter works will help you, craft your email appropriately to get through. But here are some key points for you. I will point out, what are the top 3 or 4 ways to get in trouble, so to speak, with your deliverability. I'm going to touch on this. These are totally simple, very straightforward. Don't hit spam traps or honeypots. What is that? That's an email address typically that is an older email address that hasn't been used for quite a while, that an ISP has converted to what they call a honeypot or a spam trap. Those are email addresses that can't go opt into something because as far as AOL or Gmail or any of the hosting ISPs that own those email addresses are concerned, those are no longer active inboxes, okay? And so what they do is they may be inactive for a year, 2 years, or a domain that's gone out of existence. And if you continue to send emails to those, most of the ISPs will quietly take it, gobble it up, say thank you very much, and put a ding on you and say, they hit a spam trap. They're not maintaining their list properly, okay? Really, really critical. Don't hit spam traps. You can only hit a couple spam traps, and all of a sudden your email campaigns will start going into the spam filter. The second tip, just high level, make sure people don't complain. And what that means, we'll talk about a few tips to help reduce the spam complaint rate as we go through today, but that's real important. The third is maintain low hard balances. Okay, and then the fourth component that impacts getting to the inbox is proper email server setup and so forth. There's some other issues. From a high level, we're going to touch on some of those items there. But more importantly, what today's email or webinar is about is we're going to drill into more detail on understanding why people subscribe, open, and delete your emails, avoiding spam-like content. We'll talk about that a little bit more, effective writing styles, and making sure that your HTML is properly coded. By the way, those last two bullet points, proper HTML and image management, are big deals. We see those quite often. Okay, I have a question here. Can you give an example of a service that can test your sender list? I don't know about services that will test your list, but there are services that will help you clean your list out. And again, that's assuming that you have a list that perhaps you haven't sent to for a while, or if perhaps you're using a service or your own internal in-house sending, and perhaps you're not properly maintaining the bounces, for example, or removing bounces and unsubscribes. One service comes to mind is a service called Strike Iron. Strike Iron, just like it sounds. Somebody popped in Zoom Info. I know who Zoom Info is. I didn't know if they provided that service, but you could try Zoom Info. When we send out the follow-up slides, we'll include some more recommendations on that. Okay, so spam content filter. I mentioned we're going to focus more on content, less on the actual spam filter, but this is reasonably important here. So let's go over a couple things here to help you, the spam filter. The spam content filter is only one step in the whole filtering process. But a spam content filter is one where you have direct control over making sure whether you can get through or not. It's just sort of one step. So a spam content filter, that's the one we're most familiar with, I think, for most of us. It's based on a statistical analysis of the phrases and the content and the words and so forth that are in your actual email content. And there are a bunch of different content filters. There's a Cloud Shield filter that includes several different criteria, one of which is content. Hotmail has their own, Gmail, Yahoo, all of the main ISPs have their own in-house filter. One very common engine is Spam Assassin. Spam Assassin is used on about 400 million email inboxes, heavily used in a business-to-business environment, and it was sort of the core initial engine for a lot of the other business spam filter engines. So the way it works, you're probably pretty familiar with, is it looks at your actual content, calculates a spam score based on, again, usage of different phrases, and we'll go through some specific ones. And if your score is above a certain threshold, then you can do one of three things. The first is deliver the email to the spam folder, or it might drop the email and report the failure back to the sender. So in some cases, the spam filter will say your email has been blocked due to content. And the scary thing is the number 3 scenario there is the most common nowadays, and we're really moving towards this, is just quietly throw away your email and don't tell anyone. So you don't know that it didn't get to the recipient, and the recipient doesn't know that they didn't get your email. Everybody's sort of in the blind. And it's important to note that this is really the way that we're seeing a lot of spam filters moving. And the reason for that is their philosophy is, hey, spammers have gotten really sophisticated, so if we give feedback to spammers, then they'll just figure out how to get around the spam filters. Nice philosophy, but unfortunately for the rest of us legitimate senders, what that means is your email kind of goes into ether space and disappears, and there's very little tracking on it. So just a side note on that. So it's real important. So one question is, what types of phrases and red flags for the spam will trigger a spam content filter? So here are some examples for you. Some interesting ones that you may not realize, okay? To give you an idea there, so your spam score, if you track your email, okay, so putting tracking IDs, click tracking, that will actually increase your spam score. This is based on a Spam Assassin engine. Different engines do things differently, okay, but interestingly, tracking actually will increase your spam score. You have to weigh the trade-off of do I want some visibility into how my recipients respond, or do I want to take the risk that I might lose a small percentage of my recipients or my emails going into the inboxes. Most people, of course, would prefer the link tracking, okay? But that's reasonably important. Most emails, or not most, virtually all email clients and email service providers, when you create an email, you can create the HTML version and you can create the text version. Believe it or not, there are still about 15% of recipients will set their default preferences to only get text-based emails. And a lot of that's for security reasons, but anyway, you'll still find that about 15% there actually prefer to only get text. So when you create it when you create your email campaign in Pinpointe or ExactTarget, whatever it happens to be, you want to create an HTML version and a text version. That's a big oversight. We see a lot of customers that don't do both pieces, and that will actually add to your spam score, or if those parts are totally different. Okay, if you have only text or only HTML, or if they're massively different, that's different. Things like your bills, your family, as seen by millions dollars. Obviously, there are a lot of medical terms and medications. So those are some of the phrases that will actually get you tripped up. Sending something or shouting an email, if you have all capital letters, either in the subject or through large parts of the email within the email body, that will add to the spam score. Interestingly, go ahead.
Sorry. Another thing that we've noticed that can affect deliverability or a phrase is your actual opt-out statement. So a standard opt-out statement will use words like unsubscribe or remove, but those can actually be words that specifically look for as potential indicator of spam email. So if you use, instead of unsubscribe or remove, something like no further communications, that may help you as well.
Yeah. Actually, that's actually a really interesting point and an excellent point. So it points out a couple things. One is the phrasing. So you could say, no more please, or no thanks, something to that effect, or update preferences. But interestingly, what it is there's sort of for some people, and why would you even have that as adding to the spam filter, or the spam score rather, the philosophy is, hey, some people have the philosophy of, hey, if I got an email marketing campaign, that's probably spam. So even though most of the people on the call, myself included, would say that's not very accurate, somebody signed up to get my emails, I ought to be able to send my newsletters, etc. But there are some overzealous spam fighters that believe that the world would be a better place if nobody were able to send email communications or marketing communications or newsletters. So just FYI. Anyway, you can see some other phrases there will get you caught. An interesting one is if you say dear friend. If you start your email out with dear friend or dear Jane, but in particular if you say dear friend, that's going to add as much as 2 points to your spam filter, okay, or to your spam score rather. So interestingly, if you want to see the full set of tests, because a spam content filter engine does some very deep analysis, there are literally hundreds to thousands of individual tests that are done. There's the URL at the bottom, and you can check that. That actually gives you all of the tests. It's way beyond. We could do, 8 hours of an email, of a webinar, just going through, each of the different tests for a content filter. Another note is, for example, most products like Pinpointe actually have a spam filter tester. So we have a spam checker, and what that will do, that will check your email campaign, give you some feedback on the various phrases that may or may not cause an issue, and of course you could just change them on the fly. So this particular one, as you can see, has a spam score based on a spam assassin engine of 5.6. So this is from the Pinpointe interface. And we would simply go back, modify the words party, archive, etc., and we would see that would reduce the spam score, increase the likelihood of getting it delivered. You really want to have a spam score below 2.0. By the way, if your spam score is too high, some spam filters will, again, they'll get to that mode where they'll simply quietly drop your email, not send it anywhere to the recipient, so the recipient doesn't even know that they got anything, and they won't respond to you to let you know. I think the record that we've seen for a spam score, again, you want to stay under 2. I think the highest we've seen is 29.7. We had a customer that was in the physical security business, and unfortunately about every other phrase of theirs had something to do that unfortunately triggered a spam filter. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more for some of the tips here. I think it's really important to understand, why do people subscribe to your emails, why do they unsubscribe from your emails, and why do they open your emails? This is really, really basic, but it's really, really critical to understand, because we see a lot of customers that come in, they get recipients that sign up, and they send emails that are completely unrelated to what you would think they would, might be related or of interest to their audience, and they wonder why they have, low open rates and very high unsubscribe rates. So let's start with some basics. What are the top reasons that people subscribe to your email? And this is primarily for business, by the way. B2C or business to consumer will have some other drivers. Okay. But the first is to get special offers and special pricing, okay, or to take part in a special promotion. Those are the top two reasons. The third reason is because they're a customer of yours and they want to get, customer communication, support level communication. Potentially to gain access to exclusive content, the desire to stay informed on an ongoing basis. So those are really key things. I mean, we find with our audience, what we do is we focus on trying to do webinars and so forth that hopefully will, educate the marketing world, if you will, of the email marketing business, and hopefully over time you folks will think, hey, these people at Pinpointe are reasonably knowledgeable, I'll try their service out. But we try to focus for the most part on, sending stuff that's related to webinars or information or being informative as possible. Okay, that's what our audience seems to respond really well to. So key, number one, understand why people are subscribing to your list in the first place. Next slide here, page 19, slide 19. This is really, really basic. I've got a couple tips for you coming up. The top reason why people open your emails is the organization it's from and the subject line. We have agencies that will spend hundreds to thousands on an email design, trying to make it look really cool, great graphics, etc. And the customer doesn't open it, it's totally irrelevant. So anyway, the subject line and the sender are much more important than the actual offer and the content. And let's talk about some of the top reasons why people just ignore you, okay? They're not interested, or they get too many emails from the organization, too many emails in general, or they're too busy, not in the mood, etc. I mean, you can't really change if somebody's too busy or not in the mood, obviously. But some of the items there that we'll talk about that you can impact, all right? Not interested or getting too many emails. I'll use a specific example of, and I'll tell you the company. There are companies like Marketing Experiments, I believe it is. I love their stuff, but I mean, I'm finding that for some of these services, I personally, I don't want to unsubscribe because every now and then there's some great stuff, but I'm getting anywhere from 5 to 10 emails per week from a particular vendor. I just can't consume knowledge that fast. I just don't have the time to to go off and respond to those. I'd love it if they gave me a summary once a week or every 2 weeks. Sort of in that mode of, I'm getting too much information from them, but I don't want to unsubscribe. And as a side note, I'll tell you why that's really important. Because you might at first say, well, hey, I might as well keep sending, right? There's some philosophies of, hey, you should just send as much as you can, and people who aren't interested will unsubscribe, and the ones who are will stay involved. Not necessarily true, because as I mentioned in the very beginning, Gmail and many others are moving to a spam filtering philosophy or an email priority philosophy that's based on subscriber interaction. So in this case, if I receive an email and I take 15 emails, and I don't want to unsubscribe from the vendor because I like their stuff, but if I only open 1 in 10 or 1 in 15 of their emails, ultimately that means my subscriber interaction has gone down. And in the case of Gmail, in my example, Gmail over time will say, this stuff just isn't priority. I don't think that Craig thinks this is a priority, so I'm not going to prioritize it. And over time, the next level will be, hey, he hasn't opened anything in 3 weeks. I'm going to just pop it into the spam filter, and if he wants it, he can go in there and filter it out, and re-add it. So really, really critical. The point of that, takeaway on that is, you'll see is understand the frequency that you can send to your audience, okay? What's the frequency? Totally varies. In our case, we try to send about once a week with a reminder, maybe once every 2 weeks, give or take. But again, check your audience. Roughly speaking, we would say between 1 and 5 campaigns per month for B2B and most B2C. I know there are exceptions. I see some questions coming up. Hey, we're in the financial services business. We need to send 3 alerts a day. Sure, you are an exception when customers have subscribed to that. Just make sure those people are actually opening a lot of those, because even if they've asked for the information, again, if they're not opening it over time, that will impact your deliverability and your response rate substantially. Okay, so I'm going to move through here reasonably quick here. So email writing tips, break it down. Basic stuff, but we get a lot of customers that we see, or email campaigns we see out of the hundreds of millions we've analyzed just even for this presentation, is they're missing the basics. When you build an email, it doesn't matter whether it's a really cool graphic design one that you've had an outsource agency and it's a 10 million emails that you're going to send out, or whether you're going to send a few hundred on an automated basis and it's going to be a text version going to from a sales rep to their prospects, for example. Every email should have these components. the subject and the from, and the salutation. The subject and the from are going to count for more than 50% of your response rates. I'm going to say it again. The subject and the from are going to count for more than 50% of your response rates. That means that's where you should spend the majority of your time. Okay? After that, you've got your salutation, introduction, and it's important to put a call to action. So if you want somebody to click to register for an event, or click to register for a white paper, or click here to set up a meeting, it's really important. We have another webinar where we've done some case studies and split testing analysis where we present in detail of the data behind this. But you want to get your call to action up in the very first 1 or 2 sentences. You can repeat it multiple times throughout the body, but get the first call to action within the first 1 to 2 sentences. Again, the body can have additional calls to action. The body should be short and sweet. Email is not like a book. It's not like a web page nowadays. People no longer interface with email in a way like they do with a web page. They're not going to sit and spend 20 minutes going through email. The average time people spend on an email is less than a minute. Okay, very quick. So your body, for the most part, should be very short. There are exceptions, not very many. Signature. Always include your signature with your physical address so you stay CAN spam compliant. And here's a tip for you. If you include a PS with a link, okay, like PS, check us out here, or PS, don't forget to check out this white paper, we find that that's the second most clicked link in an email. So the first would be if you have your call to action properly at the beginning. The second is you have one down at the bottom that says PS, click here. That's the number 2 spot, interesting if it's done properly. And I'm going to say it for the third time, keep it short. We see emails that are like 3 pages long. Number one, when you have that much content, people can't consume it nowadays. But think about this. Number 2 is the more content you have, the more likely you're going to get spam filtered, right? Because you have more content that could potentially statistically be filtered. Okay, so I know I've stressed the importance of the subject line. I'm going to stress it again. This is a great one. David Ogilvy, very, very famous, of course, wrote this. At 60 miles an hour, the only thing you hear in the new Rolls-Royce is the ticking of the dashboard clock. They rewrote that 104 times. Classic example of a subject. Very catchy, very memorable. As I mentioned earlier, I said 50. It's actually 60% of the decision to open is based on the email subject and who you're sending from. It's so critical. That's where you should spend your time. As a side note, almost more than 2/3 of the people will decide whether or not to report you as spam based on the subject of your email. That's pretty powerful when you think about it. So the subject of your email is really, really important. So some guiding rules on your subjects. We say spend 50% of your time on the subject and intro, or even just the subject to send from, and 50% on everything else, including the design, the delivery, and everything. Half of your time should be spent on fine-tuning the subject line. If you have tools like Pinpointe, for example, Pinpointe and many other email service providers have a split test or multivariate test tool. We have a great, really super multivariate test tool. If you have a list of, say, 50,000, you can send a test to 100,000, to 1,000 people with a couple different subject variations and see which one works best for you, and then send that version to the rest of your audience. So just a side note, use tools and testing. Spend the majority of your time on that. Subject line length versus click rate or response rate. So this is based, we've done a ton of analysis. We did in another webinar, actually, we drill into a lot more detail on the specifics. So I'm going to give you the cut to the chase. Here's the key component or takeaway is subject length. The ideal length is short, less than 45 characters. Okay, for the most part, shorter the better. If you get down to 2 or 3 words, that's kind of short. You probably can't get through that, but it's kind of hard to have a subject that's only 6 or 7 characters. But nonetheless, shorter is better. The sweet spot is 25 to 45 characters. And yes, boys and girls, that does include spaces and any kind of punctuation. So I just see a question now that comes up. 45 characters, does that include spaces? Is that just the letters? That's everything. 45 characters is roughly the magic number, okay? Keep your subject line short. In this one test that we go into a lot more detail in one of our other webinars about split testing case studies, we won't run through a specific example here. The difference between a subject line that was 44 characters and the identical email that was 94 characters, you can see in this case is about a 3x difference. Typically it won't be that dramatic, but you will see a very measurable difference. Okay, let's talk about the email send from field. It's very important to send from somebody the recipient will recognize. I hope that most of the people that have attended our event that got our invitation recognize either my name or Pinpointe, and it also gives you the opportunity to reinforce the one-to-one relationship. Obviously, it has to be a legitimate and valid email address. That may sound really simple, but again, we see somewhere between 5 and 10% of our customers sign up, and they don't realize that. They say, hey, you know, we're going to just create, we want to send this newsletter out, so we're going to create a do not reply at mycompany.com because we don't want people to send replies to us when we send the newsletter out. Not real good. That's just not going to get a good response. Number one, it's not a good email address, but good from a response perspective. But also, in many cases, we find that they haven't actually created that inbox. And so if somebody actually hits reply or the bounce messages go back, it ain't going anywhere. So it's really important you have a valid email address. We have done a lot of testing. Your mileage may vary on this, so that what I'm going to say here isn't always the case. You need to test this with your own audience. But we generally find that sending from a real person, or you can see there like Craig Stouffer, that's me, or Steve Smith from Pinpointe in this case, okay, in the example, will do much better than sending from something like info@company.com, okay, or as I mentioned, do not reply. You know, you can see their prospect under our list of company. Not good. Again, your mileage may vary. For some companies like Apple, it doesn't have to come from Steve Jobs. You see that it's Apple, you know it's Apple, and you open it, right? Or the former Steve Jobs, obviously, but you know, test it with your audience. In most cases, our analysis has shown that using an individual will be much better for your response rates. Okay, let's talk about the opening, or what's called above the fold, or in internet terms, above the jump. A lot of people don't realize this, but you got to think not only about mobile, which comes up now obviously quite often. What's your email going to look like in the preview pane for somebody in the recipient? Now, different preview panes are different sizes and different shapes, etc. But basically, think of it this way. You have the send from, the subject line, and the very first part of the intro to grab somebody's attention, just to even get them to come in the door, so to speak, and then do something. So use that real estate wisely. It's very important. Again, what I'm reinforcing is the most important parts of your email are not the cool graphic images that you use or the special offer language, etc. It's the send from, the subject line, and then the third and most important factor will end up being just the introductory sentence. So use that real estate wisely. You know, think about this. Can your opening sentence stand on its own? One of the big mistakes we see is and I reinforce this because we see customers will have an email and they'll have like 3 paragraphs or 4 or 5 sentences of introductory stuff, blah, 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 or even a webinar invite. We see this quite often. Information all about the webinar, and you've got to scroll down 60 lines to find the button that says click here to register. Really bad. Can the very beginning of your email, the first 1 or 2 sentences, stand on its own? That if somebody's in a mode of, I have 120 emails I got to get through this morning, I'm going to go through them quick. If I read the first sentence, do I get the gist to decide whether to continue to invest in it and continuing to read this or not? They know that in the very first sentence. Okay, so jumping along with content, I mentioned spam complaints because spam complaints are a really key component of how of your deliverability for your deliverability rates. So here are 2 totally basic, simple tips that everybody can do, and you should be doing this, okay? They'll have a big impact on reducing spam complaints. The first is, you see the top green arrow up here, the first is add safe removal or unsubscribe. We mentioned using the word unsubscribe may trigger a spam filter, but some form of safe removal up in the upper right part of your email at the beginning. Most recipients of ours see this. We track that. They'll click this link. And then at the bottom, some kind of reminder as to why the person is receiving the email. This is one of the big mistakes we see. We have seen that, by the way, by putting the combination of the safe unsubscribe or an unsubscribe link at the top and the reminder at the bottom, we see empirically that spam complaint rates will go down anywhere from 50 to 75% for a campaign. If I took this exact same campaign and I removed those 2 spots, we would double. We don't get a lot of spam complaint rates, but I can tell you we would roughly double or potentially triple the number of times that somebody hits a spam button. Okay, huge, big issue. Okay, and again, it's so simple to do. Everybody should be doing this. In particular, the reminder is down at the bottom, and you can put it anywhere else. You might, by the way, you might put it in the intro. Hi Steve, I'm sending you this, or hi Steve, as a reminder, you saw our webinar last week and I'm sending some follow-up, etc. So you can work that in, but make sure that the recipient knows why to get your email. Remember, the average person in business now is getting, I don't know the number, 100 emails, 120 emails a day. It's an obscene amount. You got to remind them, where they signed up. We do see quite often, we'll see customers that have maybe a registration page where they're collecting content from a URL or from a website, and then when they send the email, it's totally different branding, different name, and the recipient's going, why the heck did I get this? I signed up for a book, and now I've got this email from some totally other company. So, you need to help people connect the dots. Real important. So here's some just a couple tips on the actual writing. Do personalize where possible. So as I mentioned earlier in detail, generally sending from Bob Smith at ABC versus sales at ABC, the first is more personal. It's developing and reinforcing a one-to-one relationship. That's one of the advantages we potentially have with email marketing, is to be able to have a one-to-one or a semi-one-to-one, what appears to be a one-to-one relationship with the recipient. So leverage that. It's very, very important. By the way, one question that comes up is, can I use the recipient's email address or name in the subject line? Don't do that. You might want to run a small test with your results with your, within your list and see if that impacts your results. But as a general rule, that does not do well. It did great 3 or 4 years ago, but spammers figured that out. And so what spammers started to do is they put your email address. You all know this. You see this. Go look in your spam folder. They see your email address, or you see your first name or your full name in the subject line, and most people will now look at that and go, oh, that must be spam. So don't bother doing it. It's now, normally, as I said 2 or 3 years ago, would have been good and not good now. Do use specific measurable calls to action. Like as I said before, work in the call to action in the first paragraph, ideally in the first or second sentence, right? That's the click here to register, download now, get the report, whatever that is. Make sure it's in the first 1 or 2, and make sure 1 or 2 sentences, and make sure that it's clear and measurable. Okay, so the person doesn't have to guess what the heck the link actually means. That's not necessarily good. So size matters. The maximum width, you don't design your email to be 2,000 pixels wide. The maximum width we see is between 600 and 800 pixels. Obviously, there's a whole separate discussion. We could do an entire webinar on mobile, so I'm for the moment sort of discounting that or indirectly factoring this in. But the maximum width, most email previewers still only preview between 600 and 800 pixels wide. So sort of keep that in mind. A year ago it was 600. We personally, for our designs, we go between 720 and 800 pixels. I'm not sure exactly how you would test that with your audience, but we kind of use those as guidelines and recommend you keep it in about that width. And monitor your image to text ratio, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail in the next slide. Length matters. Short is good. I can't say this enough. Short subject line, short content, much, much better in email marketing than any other medium. So it's very, very important. Drive that point home for folks. Okay, and stay relevant. Don't oversend. So again, I'm trying to focus on things that as an email marketer you have control over. Okay, if you're working, you have different groups in the organization that are responsible for email servers. We have a great webinar for them that tells them, how, all the details about how a spam filter works and so forth. That goes into more detail, more technical detail. Great for them. But I'm assuming that most of the people on today's call are email marketers. You own the content. If you own the content and sending the emails, we're focusing on things that you have control over. So stay relevant, don't oversend. The number one reason that people leave your list is because they get too much stuff from you. So, and again, the question comes up, what's too much? How often can I send? It's really hard. I can give you a starting guideline of between 1 and 5 times a month, but that will vary. You need to test your audience. One guideline I would give you would be, don't send if you don't have something worthwhile to say. So to say, we got to send our weekly email out. We've got to get something done. It's time for our weekly newsletter, or whatever it happens to be. Don't just make something up to send it. I mean, if you have something important to say, send it. The converse of that is, I would recommend that you figure out how to have something important for your audience to say, or to say to your audience at least once a month. So again, the other end of the spectrum, we see people that say, well, we just send out this quarterly newsletter. That has a whole host of its other issues that will cause your emails to get a lower deliverability. A big part of that is in 90 days, believe it or not, email attrition, and particularly in a B2B environment or business-to-business environment, we will see about 25% of those emails will become invalid. I'm sorry, about 5 or 6% rather in that time period. So understand your frequency. So stay relevant and stay at the right frequency. You need to figure out the right frequency for your audience. 1 to 5 times a month is a starting point. Pummeling your recipients with 15 emails a week is not a good thing. Okay, so I have a couple technical things. So you will get the slides. Don't have to worry about scribbling down, what this HTML is. And some of the stuff here is we find that a lot of the people on the line, some of them have some HTML design experience, and others are responsible. Maybe you're responsible for sending the email, but you have a designer that produces the email for you. You might do the final tweaking. That's the most common scenario we find. So some of these tips are technical, and if you're scratching your head going, geez, I'm not an HTML coder, I don't understand this stuff, that's okay. These are tips that you need to send to your designer or make sure that your designer understands. This may sound really simple, right? But just say, well, my designer designs HTML. They do websites all the time, they're really good at this stuff, they understand it. You will be surprised. I'll show you in the next slide. HTML email clients only display about 40% of all HTML code, okay? So you really need to, understand some of these. I'm going to go through here pretty quickly, but the point is, images are blocked in about 70% of emails by default. Okay, so use your images sparingly, and you use alternate text to tag your images. If you can, you should always try to preview your email with images blocked, so you can see what it actually looks like. Okay, so see what your email looks like when the images are blocked. Here's an example of one. Again, by default, emails are blocked. If I, images are blocked. If I look at this email on slide 33, I had no clue what this email was about, and I put it in my spam or put it in my trash folder. That's where I actually went to look for some examples. Not very informative. Here's an even better one. We see this all the time. Here's what I sent, or in this case, what a customer sent, and here's what they got. Click here to unsubscribe. Guess what? They had a super high unsubscribe rate. Customer called and said, there's something the matter with your system. Everybody unsubscribed. This is why. All the recipient got was something that said image.jpg, click here to unsubscribe. Terrible. So as you're doing your designs, make sure that you're using sparingly images. It's real important. Poor response. Okay, and for some of the coding tips, again, you'll see these on the slides. I don't have time to go through these in detail, but I will make them available for you. By the way, we also have a white paper that will include the link, or if you're anxious, go to our website, pinpointe.com, go to the front page, you'll see in the middle 33 HTML coding tips. You can download that white paper, and it gives you a bunch of, obviously, HTML coding tips that you or your designer should have or should use. But here are the top-level takeaways. Outlook and Gmail only use about 42% of HTML code features. That's really key. So things like aligning text left and right, they're background images. Outlook doesn't even support background images, so it's not going to display properly. Yahoo actually does about the best at rendering, but Outlook does not support the following: forms, Flash, JavaScript, plugins, videos, animated GIFs, CSS positioning, images of built-in bullet points. There's a lot of stuff there, so understand these key points. If nothing else, download the white paper that I just pointed you to that you can find on the front page of the Pinpointe website. Send it to your designer, or if you're a designer, read it, and you'll see. We recommend code like it's 1999, designed for the lowest common denominator, and that lowest common denominator will be Outlook 2007 and Outlook 2010, actually, which is even more slightly brain dead. Okay? Here's some other points. I'm not going to go through this. It just has to do with styling. The takeaway for this is you need to use inline styles. Code like it's 1999. Paragraph breaks. Specific, we actually have a little information here for some of the background codes. Don't use image maps, as I mentioned, JavaScript, etc. So when you get the slides, it'll have the actual coding here for you. So the last minute here, I've tried to work in as much of the questions and answers I can through this. If you still have questions, pop them up. I'm going to leave you with one thing. What's the best bang for the buck? Here are the top 3 or 4 things that you can do when you leave this webinar today that should have a measurable, notable impact on your response rates. Keep your subject line less than 45 characters. Put your call to action in the first paragraph. Keep your email short. Run the spam checker, and use images intelligently. If you do any 3 of those 5, you will have a measurable improvement in your email response rates immediately. And of course, the last one is test, test, test. We didn't go into testing here. We just sort of referred to it or inferred about it, but testing is absolutely critical. Many email systems like Pinpointe have a split test tool, as I mentioned. You should use that. Okay. But we do thank you for your time. We ask, please, share this around if you can. If you have questions, again, post them in the question and answer. If you can, hop on Twitter and post the question on Twitter to Pinpointe and LeadFerret1. You see the addresses up there, and that'd be great because we get a lot of people go to, of course, go to Twitter, and that way you can share the interaction and the response with everybody. So we do appreciate it, and keep the questions coming in here at the end. We'll finish up, and we'll get those to you in the white paper.
If you don't already have an account with LeadFerret, it's totally free business-to-business data that you can use for prospecting. And so, go to leadferret.com, create a free account if you have not already done so, and you will get 200 free download points.